the store that symbolized the city. Nike didn't offer a public reason for the closure, and when King 5 asked the company directly, Nike didn't respond, but the pattern around it told the story. Fox Business reported the closure came amid crime concerns and post-pandemic shopping woes as the city struggles to bounce back from the pandemic. Local reporting connected the closure to rising violent crime and an unresolved homelessness crisis compounding a lack of affordable housing in the area. Nike's next closest locations became Bellevue, Auburn, and North Bend, all outside Seattle city limits. The company didn't scale back. It relocated across a jurisdictional line, the list nobody wanted to write. The Downtown Seattle Association counted roughly 500 street-level businesses closed downtown since 2019, against roughly 300 new openings, and that count was already over a year old by the time Nike left. Columbia Sportswear's Seattle flagship closed after being looted. Regal Meridian shut its 16-screen movie theater at 7th and Pike. Amazon, the city's largest private sector employer, began pulling out of its Port 99 office tower, a move one real estate insider called the first domino in the company, rethinking its Seattle footprint. Saks Fifth Avenue and the North Face also exited the downtown core in the years that followed. Seattle Times. By the time Seattle Times columnist John Talton wrote about the closure, the numbers had hardened into a trend line. Seattle's Central Business District retail vacancy rate sat around 13.5%, compared with under 2% in 2019. Bellevue had a vacancy rate of just 1.5%, down from 5% in 2019. Same regional economy, same pandemic, opposite trajectories. Here is where the resentment lives. Downtown generates the majority of Seattle's city tax revenue. There is no comparably sized American metro that thrives without a functioning central core, and residents were watching businesses solve that problem by simply leaving the city rather than fixing what was wrong with it. Escalation. It got worse, not better. Here's where it gets worse. Nike's exit wasn't a one-time correction. It was an early data point in a decline that kept building for years afterward. By 2025, the Downtown Seattle Association's annual economic report showed office vacancy had hit a post-pandemic peak of 25, with the Central Business District specifically running above 32. Combined office and retail vacancy downtown reached 35, nearly double the worst levels the city saw during the Great Recession. Office demand had run negative since 2020, meaning companies weren't just failing to expand, they were shrinking or exiting space they already had. DSA President John Scholes told reporters, Seattle lost more than 13,000 jobs in 2025 alone, pointing to elevated costs and rising salary demands as central drivers. A separate report tracing the 5 years since Seattle enacted its 2020 payroll tax found the city had lost 30,000 downtown jobs and $10 billion in assessed office value over that period, while neighboring Bellevue gained on both fronts. Assessed office values in Seattle's core fell 48.Yahoo! That last number is worth sitting with. Nearly half the value of downtown Seattle's office real estate gone, on paper, in 5 years. Where the money came from, and where it didn't go. On July 6, 2020, the Seattle City Council passed what it branded the JumpStart Seattle payroll tax, sponsored by then-councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. The structure taxed companies with payrolls above $7 million annually, at rates from 0.7% up to 2.4%, applied to individual employee compensation above $150,000, with the highest rate reserved for firms like Amazon with payrolls exceeding $1 billion. The city projected roughly $214 million in first-year revenue. Actual 2021 collections came in at $231 million. The money was earmarked, at least on paper, for affordable housing, community-led development, small business assistance, and Green New Deal investments. A 2026 review of the tax's 6-year record found the dedications had been converted to suggestions, with most of the revenue redirected into the city's general fund rather than the specific programs voters were told it would fund. And even with that revenue stream running, the same JumpStart tax is now projected to bring in $76 million less than expected this year, contributing to a projected $140 million budget gap heading into 2027. Unbiased headlines too. No program sustains itself against math like that. Nike's side of the ledger. Nike's Seattle area retreat wasn't isolated to a single storefront. The company's own headquarters situation in Beaverton, Oregon, just across the state line, tells a parallel story about corporate contraction, even if the causes there are different. In December 2023, Nike announced a 3-year plan to cut $2 billion in costs. By February 2024, that turned into a formal announcement of a 2% workforce reduction, more than 1,600 employees globally. On April 19, 2024, Nike filed a WARN notice with Oregon officials confirming 740 positions eliminated at its Beaverton world headquarters, executed in 2 phases, the second completing by June 28, 2024. Nike's own annual report showed Beaverton headquarters headcount dropping 6.1 to 10,700 employees by the close of fiscal year 2024. The company absorbed a $443 million pre-tax charge tied to severance and compensation costs in its fiscal third quarter alone. A subsequent round in July 2024 eliminated more than 200 additional positions, including 33 vice president roles and 110 senior director roles. USA Today 5. Nike's Seattle store closure and its Beaverton layoffs were separate business decisions with separate causes, but together they describe a company retreating from fixed, high-cost physical footprints in the Pacific Northwest at exactly the moment downtown Seattle needed anchor tenants to stay. The root cause nobody campaigns on. Seattle's fiscal shortfall, according to Seattle Times analysis, comes primarily from overspending rather than lower revenues. That distinction matters. This isn't a city starved of tax revenue. JumpStart alone pulled in over $231 million in its first year and grew from there. It's a city where a widening set of obligations outpaced even growing collections, while the underlying tax base, the office towers and retail storefronts generating that revenue, kept shrinking. Seattle Times. Researchers at NYU and Columbia describe the mechanism in a paper cited by the Seattle Times, an urban doom loop where declining office work reduces foot traffic and consumption, which increases crime through fewer eyes on the street, which lowers municipal revenue, which makes it harder to fund public services without raising taxes further. Challenges the researchers said would predominantly hit blue cities in the coming years. Not on roads, not on schools, not on public safety. The compounding costs land somewhere, and downtown commercial tenants have been the ones absorbing them by leaving. Mayor Bruce Harrell's administration has pointed to real progress on the crime side. Shoplifting, which had added costs to every downtown retailer, leveled off from a chaotic and rampant starting point, and violent crime overall has stabilized or declined under Harrell and City Attorney Ann Davison. But Harrell walked into a 2025 re-election fight against Democratic Socialist challenger Katie Wilson that came down to exactly this record. Voters weighing falling crime numbers against a jobs and vacancy picture that kept getting worse, regardless. Wilson led Harrell by nearly 10 points in the August 2025 primary, a signal that even real safety improvements weren't enough to offset 3 years of hollowed-out storefronts. EBCnews.go1. Population notably kept growing. Replace with, population kept growing regardless. Seattle posted one of the 4th fastest population growth rates among major U.S. cities in 2025. Even as DSA President John Scholes noted the city had been losing jobs for 3 straight years. More people, fewer jobs, emptier offices. That combination is the actual story behind the Nike storefront that Harrell's office once described in a press statement as just shifting economic trends. Nike's exit from 6th and Pike in January 2023 wasn't the beginning of downtown Seattle's decline, and it wasn't the end of it either. It was one data point in a 5-year stretch that has cost the city 30,000 downtown jobs, roughly half the assessed value of its office real estate, and a payroll tax now underperforming its own projections by $76 million a year. If a company with Nike's brand recognition and 26 years of downtown presence couldn't justify staying, what does that tell you about the businesses without Nike's name recognition trying to make it on the same blocks? Put your take in the comments.